Hey Meadows family. Man, it's almost the weekend. I'm excited for this weekend. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited to come and gather to worship our God. Studying this week has been really encouraging for me as we looked at the holiness of God, as we looked at God's aseity, as we looked at the decrees of God, and today we'll look at the eternity of God. And one of my prayer requests is that this study will help us prepare for worship. A part of this study as well is memorizing scripture. And I hope and I want to encourage you that find a verse or two that you studied this week that really stood out to you, that spoke to you this week. For me, it's Acts 17, 24, and 25. I'm still working on it right now, so I don't have it completely memorized. But the God who has made the world and everything in it. Still working on it. Being Lord of heaven and earth, he does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needs anything in himself. But he gives life to all humankind and breath to all living things. I think that was close enough. So clearly I'm still working on my verse for this week. But I want to encourage you also to work on your verses as well during this week. Good news with this reading plan, it's only 5 days long, and so you have the weekend to catch up. But if you are caught up already, I encourage you to reflect on what you have learned this week about the attributes of God. And one great way to reflect on what you've studied is by journaling. Now, maybe you're like me who journaling doesn't really come naturally, but I encourage you to grab a notebook, grab a pen, or writing utensil of some sort. I enjoy a fountain pen, as I use right here. Maybe it's a crayon, maybe it's markers. But find something that you like writing with. Find a journal, a notebook, and start with here. It's a very easy, we've been talking about it through this week, very easy way to start journaling. Just highlight, write out a verse or two from the reading of that day. Explain. Explain what this passage is about and how that verse relates into the passage. A is apply. R, then respond to what you've just read, whether it's writing out your prayer, whether it's writing out a call of action. And it's a very simple way where you can then go back and read through what you've written and express your thoughts in a different way. I know over the last several months here of doing Here journals regularly, it's been a really blessing to go back and read through some of my Here journals I've done in this study and others as well. But for our passage today is John 1 through 18. Again, if you haven't read John 1 through 18, I encourage you just to pause right now, read it, study it on your own, and then come back after you read it. But I love John. I love the book of John. I love John's writings. And one of the reasons why I love John's writings is because it's simply complex. It's simple in its writing styles, really comparative to Peter or Luke or Paul even. It's a very simple writing style, but yet it's very complex and it's jam-packed with theology and knowledge of God. From John 1 through 18, we're going to look at the eternity of God. Now, the eternity of God, put simply, is God's infinity in relationship to time. And this can be expressed in two ways. The first way that this can be expressed is seeing that God is outside time. Now, unlike us as created beings, we are in time. We are bounded by time. We cannot go back in time or we can't go forward in time, even though we may want to at times. But we are stuck in the present. But God, being outside time, And in his eternity, he is not bounded by time, and he can see all of time at once, at the same time. The second way to understand God's eternity is knowing that God has always existed. There's never been a moment of time where God hasn't existed, and he has always existed in all of his attributes. Now, in our passage, John 1, we see that in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with John, or with God, and the Word was God. And this alludes to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, before time, God was and has always been, and he always will be here. And so the ways that we can understand eternity is that God is outside of time and is not bounded by time, and he has always existed and always will exist. Now, the New Testament authors have a couple phrases to help us unpack this idea. The first phrase is found in 1 Corinthians 2:7 and Acts 15:18, which reads proton ionian. In English, before eternity. These two authors in Luke and in Hebrews are pointing backwards in relation that God has always existed. He has always existed in eternity. He has never been created or doesn't have a beginning. He has always existed. The second phrase that the Greek authors use is this: eis os aionios, meaning eis, into eternity. And this phrase is the opposite of what we just looked at, is going into eternity, that God will always exist for eternity. Now, the final phrase is a phrase Paul uses to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:16, and it's this phrase, oi manos exon athenesin. Translation: who alone is immortal. Paul is describing to Timothy that God is immortal, that summarizing what we just said, that he has no beginning or no end. He always will exist. He is eternal. So for us as believers then, knowing that God is eternal, that he is outside time, that he has no beginning and no end, and that he will always exist, we then can have hope and confidence that we will be with him forever and ever. Meadows, I hope that this brings encouragement. I hope that you're gaining a lot through this study. And I'm excited to join you this Sunday as we continue studying and looking at the attributes of God. This Sunday, we'll look at the independence of God. Meadows, I hope you have a great weekend reflecting on the attributes of God and worshiping who God is.